Hello, everyone, and welcome back to WordFence Live. Today, we're looking at hosting account security and what makes a hosting provider a good choice for WordPress security. Specifically, today, we're going to be focusing on 7 things every hosting provider must be doing to keep your site safe. Stick around, we'll be right back. Welcome to another edition of WordFence Live. It's the Halloween edition today of WordFence Live. So hope you are all getting ready for Halloween and have a good one. Today's October 27th, 2020, and we hope you're having a good week right now, and we're happy that you're joining us. My name is Scott Miller. I'm a customer support engineer here at WordFence. In a few moments, I'm going to be joined by QA engineer and threat analyst Ram Gall, as well as threat analyst Chloe Chamberlain. We have a pretty fun episode ready for you today. We're going to be talking about hosting and security at the hosting level. So more specifically, 7 things to look for when you choose a host, or if you already have a project going and you have a host, these are some things that you can check out with your current hosting provider. Make sure you're doing them, make sure that you have set up, and it will help with your security going forward. In some rare cases, we've seen hosting providers as the cause for widespread issues and widespread hacking. And in June of last year, we found numerous hosts with insufficient file permissions, and it allowed attackers to use just one infected site to take over multiple other sites. And we'll talk about this here in a few minutes. But like I said, these situations are rare, but they can happen and they have happened. And we're going to post a link to our blog post for that in the chat so that you can check that out if you're interested. This led us to ask the question, what can hosting providers do to ensure your site is safe and secure? And as I mentioned today, we're going to take a look at 7 things that they should be doing to keep your site safe. So if you're new here to WordPress and WordFence, or maybe both, then you're in the right place, because WordFence is the #1 choice and the best choice for securing WordPress sites. And we're currently protecting well over 3 million sites worldwide. If you're excited about today's stream and you're interested in this content, it would mean a lot if you hit the like button below the video here. Let us know that you want this sort of content going forward, and we will be sure to produce similar content for you in the future. You can also hit the subscribe button and the bell, and you'll be notified when we go live. Right now, we're going live each Tuesday at noon Eastern Time. That's 9 a.m. Pacific. And we've been on a pretty good streak here going live. So we got a bunch of videos here on our YouTube channel that you can check out. And, we do some live exploits of some vulnerabilities, sort of walk you through them if you're interested in that. We set up some different WordFence features, and we talk about a lot of security here and help you get things straightened out. So check out the YouTube channel here, and, lots of good content there. We are broadcasting to YouTube. So we ask that you don't put anything sensitive or personal in the chat, and we are doing our best to moderate that as well. If you have anything specific to your site, maybe your site's been hacked, you're compromised, rather than posting a link or anything in the chat, you can send us a message directly at feedback@wordfence.com. Use the subject line WordFence Live there, and we'll get eyes on that and get back to you. As I said, we're bringing in QA engineer, threat analyst Ram Gall. So let's bring in Ram and Chloe Chamberlain, also a threat analyst. How are you two doing?
I'm having a spooky week.
Chloe, what's up in Maine? Are you still in Maine?
I'm in Michigan right now, and things are good.
Ah.
It's a little cloudy today, but at least it's cold out.
It is, in fact, finally cold out here, too, which is crazy.
What is cold over there for you, Ram?
Like 72 degrees.
That sounds pretty nice. So let's get started with, well, first, let's talk a little bit about the blog post that I teased there that we had from a while back. Now, this was, if I'm remembering correctly, 4 popular hosting companies that had permissions issues, and it led to some problems there. Ram, do we have a little bit of an overview about that?
I think Chloe might actually have more info because I know that she cleaned some of the sites in question, but from what I remember, it was basically all four hosts effectively were owned by one of the major hosting companies, and they all use the same hosting control panel and infrastructure. And due to some permissions issues, effectively, I guess what turned out is that if a site was infected on one shared hosting account, it could reach across to any other hosting account on the same server and cross-infect it, or maybe it was just grab credentials or like database credentials. I think that it might have been both. But Chloe, do you remember what the actual vulnerability was?
I don't remember too much of the details. I do remember that back when I was on the site cleaning team, we kept getting a lot of cases where a user badminton would appear. And so it would not frequently, but oftentimes we would see reinfections with that. So it led to an internal investigation where one of our team members took a look at everything and figured out that it looked like I think you could like traverse directories basically due to some permission errors and stuff, and then find credentials. And then I think they were taking database credentials and then creating those users and then doing all their damage. I think that's what was going on there.
Okay, so it sounds like if you had an infected site on one of these hosts, the attacker could then look at the WP config files for all the other sites on that particular shared hosting server, even if they weren't your account, and then grab the database credentials and then use some sort of external like phpMyAdmin or database administration panel to make changes to those databases. Does that sound about right?
I think so. And then if after the cleaning, if they didn't change their database credentials, they're still compromised, and the attackers can still use them.
All right. Yeah, I can see how that could be bad. We
Yeah.
do still see a lot of directory traversal attacks against, and we do block a lot of directory traversal attacks, mostly looking for WP config files. So trying to access, databases. Oh, that's something we should also mention in one of our steps. Do they allow external database access? And we'll get to that in our different steps. But yeah, there
It's
are
another
ways
thing to consider.
that is another thing to consider.
I see we got some other viewers here from Michigan. I see Norfolk, Virginia. Yeah, let us know where you're watching from. Now, keep an eye out in the chat, the comments as well. We're going to be posting a link to the swag form that we typically do here. So if you want a chance to win some free WordFence swag, you can click on the link that you're going to be seeing in chat, and you'll want to be one of the first 5 to correctly guess the answer to the following question. And that is, what does DDoS stand for, and why would an attacker do this? So the first 5 correct answers there will win swag. And be sure to put your email address in there. We will reach out to you there to contact you. Again, that is, what does DDoS stand for, and why would an attacker do this? All right, lots of familiar names here in the chat. Happy to have everybody back. We appreciate it. Yeah, we got a good bit to cover today, so what do you think? Dive right into it?
Yeah. Let's get right into it.
So the first thing we're going to look at today is secure credentials and secure authentication. These are some things that we've talked about a lot. Very important. So Ram, Chloe, what are we looking at here whenever we're looking for a hosting provider, or if you already have a hosting provider picked out? What are some things that we're taking into consideration with regard to that?
Well, first of all, I think we should define what a credential is. Usually, a credential consists of a username and password combination, which is basically it's just a single factor of authentication. It's something to identify you, which is the username, and something to authorize you with or authenticate you, which is the password. Authorization comes after, right, Chloe?
Yep.
So, and then a second factor of authentication would be is if they send you an SMS message, or if you have an authenticator app, time-based one-time password, which we've discussed in other WordFence Live shows. And if a hosting provider offers two-factor authentication, that's really good.
Yeah, that was something I was going to bring up. I remember, a few weeks, maybe a month or so ago, we talked about 2FA and with regard to the SMS and authenticator use. Now, we switched over a while back. With regard to that, what's the difference there, and why do we prefer authenticator based for that?
So let's just get this out of the way. SMS-based two-factor is still better than no two-factor. It still adds a layer of protection that someone would have to be fairly dedicated to overcome. But if you've got, say, a bank account or a Bitcoin account, $10,000 or $100,000 in it, that's plenty of reason for an attacker to, say, buy a SIM card and call your phone company and say, hey, I'd like this person's phone number ported over to my SIM card because I am this person. And usually all they need is like the last four of your social, which is something that is in like a bunch of data breaches. Like I think most people in the US can safely assume that the last four of their socials breached at this point. So even if not the whole thing. So, yeah.
It's unfortunate and also a little bit scary to think of, but yeah, so, we definitely recommend 2FA authenticator based, and that is a free feature as of, I believe, a little over a year ago for WordFence, and we have the standalone WordFence login security plugin, which adds that as well, which is also free. So going on with passwords and your hosting provider, do they offer secure credentials and secure authentication? What else is there to look for with regard to passwords?
I feel like something that's kind of underrated is whether or not your hosting provider actually enforces like strong passwords, or do they, or even allows you to use strong password. Some systems will limit you to a password no longer than 8 to 10 characters. And some hosting providers will allow you to use shorter passwords. Now, most are better these days than they have been in the past, but it's still something to look for. If you can't, enter in a password that's 12 to 16 characters long, then that's going to take less time to crack than a password that's 8 characters long. And likewise, if they allow you to enter in a password that's 5 characters long, that could be a problem.
Yeah, because perhaps another hosting account gets compromised and that somehow leads to your account because they used a 5-character password.
Exactly. I mean, if you make it easier for users to do the right thing, then that's honestly making it easier for users to do the right thing is one of the best ways to make things secure.
Now, I remember, Chloe, you had talked about a little while back, and we brought it up before, but what would we recommend sort of, as a minimum for a password length? Would it be 12 plus or more?
Yeah, it really varies because there's different opinions and things. I'd say about 10 is a good starting point at a very minimum. Some people say 8, but I'd say 10-ish is a really good minimum. But of course, the longer is even better. 12 is a good starting point too. So somewhere between 8 and 12, with 10 being the happy medium.
Yep.
And
length matters more than the special characters.
Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Yeah, I was going to say, we had an episode where we showed some common bad passwords, and both short and very guessable. And we've shared some different websites to check, similar passwords. We recommended not using your specific password to check how long something would take to crack like that. But definitely a good thing to consider to use. But we're more talking about, a hosting provider. What do they allow you to do? How long of a password are they going to let you use, so on and so forth. So further into what a hosting provider offers with secure credentials and authentication practices, should we jump into FTP here and talk about that a little bit?
I think we've, kind of discussed that in previous sessions as well. But FTP is a clear text protocol. Anyone who is, if you're on like a public Wi-Fi network, if there's any way for someone to get in between you and the server you're talking to via FTP, they can read the contents of what you're uploading, including the password to the hosting account, and if they have that, then they can upload stuff to your hosting account, so that would be bad. Try to find a hosting provider that at least allows you to use FTPS or FTP over TLS, though SFTP, which actually runs over SSH, is preferred, I want to say. I mean, I don't know if it's actually more secure, but it certainly seems to. It's certainly my preference.
Yeah, I think there's some pros and cons to each, but yeah, FTP is good.
But as long as it's not using regular FTP or
Yeah.
forbid trivial FTP,
Yeah.
TFTP. If your hosting provider allows TFTP, you should probably not use that hosting provider.
Yeah. I don't know if that's common, but yeah.
That's one of our first red flags right there, I think.
Mhm.
So
I don't think
Very
I've ever actually seen a hosting provider allow TFTP. That was kind of a joke, but
maybe the first red flag, maybe if your hosting provider is only letting you use a password like six characters long, that might be the first red flag.
yeah,
There. So
that'd be a red flag. Or if they're like allowing you to use one that's like 5 or 6 characters long, that
Yeah.
might be bad too.
that's also true. Okay, so what else with regard to secure credentials, authentication?
I feel like we've more or less covered most. I mean, I guess we could talk about SSL or TLS, but I feel like that's kind of a separate topic, and we've covered it in past videos quite a lot. So
Yeah.
And with regard to 2FA, of course, even if we're just talking about hosting providers, you want to set that up wherever you can, wherever you have the option to set up 2FA. And as Ram mentioned earlier, even if you just have the option for SMS, it's still better than no 2FA, no multi-factor. So anywhere that you can set that up is a good thing to do. So if you currently have a hosting provider or you're looking into it, that would be one thing that you can check. And we'll have a list of these later for you to check out as well. So what's next here, Ram?
well, number 2 is look for a host that doesn't encourage you to stack multiple installations in one cPanel or control panel. I say cPanel the way we say Kleenex, just because it's a fairly common control panel used by hosting providers. And generally speaking, we're talking about shared hosting providers. If you are looking for a VPS or dedicated solution, then you take on a lot of these responsibilities on your own. So I mean, these are still good things to know, but that just means you'll have to handle them directly instead of your hosting provider handling them for you. And therefore, looking for the right hosting provider becomes less of a which hosting provider offers this and more of a am I comfortable doing these things.
So for anybody new who's tuning in, what is going to be a potential issue or some issues if you have a cPanel and you have a bunch of sites stacked there? Maybe you have a bunch of clients and you have them all in one cPanel.
Well, we have, I think we covered this in our, worst disasters we've seen. But at one point we had a site clean where 30 sites were in a single cPanel owned by an agency. And they allowed their customers to have WP admin access. And one credential compromise led to the entire cPanel account and all 30 sites on it getting infected with a JavaScript redirect. So that is a danger. And I do see that, I feel like this is happening less frequently, but I do remember in the past, one of the selling points of, different hosting providers, deluxe hosting accounts, was that you could host multiple domains on the same control panel, which, yes, does save money, but comes with a set of risks.
Yeah. So like if there's a 0-day vulnerability out there or something you haven't patched on your site yet, and you have several accounts in that one cPanel, an attacker can easily just upload a web shell exploiting the initial vulnerability and then using that web shell to hop around into all the other sites there and infect those. So it's actually really easy for them to completely infect every site in the hosting account. So it's very important that you don't have all those sites in the same hosting account.
Now you cleaned a lot of sites, I'm sure, where an infection had spread throughout a cPanel. Was it fairly common to see that whenever you would get a cleaning in multiple sites on one cPanel?
Yeah, that's why we require that all of your sites are cleaned at the same time, because it's very common for all of them to get infected at the same time. And a couple weeks ago, we talked about one of my sites, and we were securing one of the sites. that have previously been compromised. That account, actually, I have a bunch of testing subdomains in there, and the one site that got compromised did infect all the other sites in there. So that can lead to a really big headache.
Wait, that actually worked?
What?
But you actually managed to get the sites infected? I know you were trying for that as like a honeypot, right?
Yeah. Well, the site got infected, and then remember the host cleaned it, so then I couldn't really do much with it, and I was really sad.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
That was the time that Chloe got mad that the sites got hacked, but it was cleaned before she could get over
Yeah.
to it to
That's one thing to
inspect
look
everything.
for in a host is your host clean your sites for you magically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
or
I
you
guess
know,
in most cases that may be a good thing, huh?
Yeah. No, for me it's not, but for most people it's definitely a great thing.
yes. Though sometimes those can miss things, like the host-based site cleans do miss things, or they might not let you know in a timely manner.
Yeah.
Sometimes they'll just shut you down, and it's not always consistent how frequently they scan. So.
Yeah.
And another thing going along with that, hosting providers don't necessarily discourage putting multiple sites in a single cPanel. It's it's really easy to do, and like you said, it saves some money in most cases. Now, is it easy to create multiple users in a cPanel and sort of split them up yourself, or does it depend?
I don't think that cPanel offers an easy way to do that, to actually separate out sites by different users. I think that's the sort of thing that you'd need some degree of, basically root level access in order to do. So I don't think, I may be incorrect about this, but as to my understanding, the state of cPanel is that you can not create multiple separate users that can't access each other's content in a single cPanel. Well, at least not at the level that shared hosting providers give you. And I mean, we do want to talk about staging sites as well and testing sites. And I know that Chloe, you've seen a lot of sites get infected via old staging or testing or just old versions of sites, right?
Yeah, and like blank WordPress installations laying around in there as well. So you want to make sure that you're not using your test and dev environments inside the same cPanel, because of course, if you decide you want to stop doing development on your development site and just start hammering your live site, and you forget that you have your dev site there, and you don't update any of the plugins or anything on it because you forgot about it, or it doesn't get updated as quickly because it's a dev site, or whatever reason there is, it can infect those other sites hosted there, and potentially affect your live site. And yeah, so you should definitely have different hosting accounts for those test sites and things.
And I see one of our commenters is recommending doing, if you do run a VPS, use containers for each user. And that's actually a pretty useful way to do it. Just remember that, with Docker by default, unless you specifically set it not to run as root, it'll still run as root, which is bad. So you probably don't want to run the container or set up the default user in the container as UID 0. So anyways, that's an aside. We won't get too much into containers because most people are on shared hosting and won't have to deal with it. But it is generally a good way to actually separate users if you do it right.
Now, before we move on, anybody who's new, maybe just got a couple sites on a hosting account, is there an easy way for them to tell if the sites are isolated correctly outside of pretty much simply checking with their host and seeing how things are set up there?
I mean, if you look in the file manager and you can see from a single file manager different website folders for different websites, and the control panel has, multiple domains that go to different folders, chances are those are not isolated.
And that's what we are trying to avoid here. So let's move on to anything else to add before we move on to our third thing here.
I think we're good on that. I think we should move on to logging.
I just wanted to loop back real quick to the SSL thing. One thing I think we forgot to mention is you should see if your host offers it for free. I think some hosts charge a lot of money for you to get an SSL certificate, but you should be able to get one for free. So see if your host allows you to install those for free. And if not, then maybe look for a different host.
Yeah, it's occasionally in support, I'll see a ticket come in where somebody will say, I just got WordFence Premium, but my site is still showing as not secure, and that's something, as Chloe said, check with your hosting provider because that may be offered for free and you may be able to get that taken care of pretty quickly with their help. So that's another thing to consider when you're choosing a hosting provider. Now, Ram, you mentioned logging, and that is the third thing we're going to take a look at, adequate logging here. Do you want to start into that for us?
Sure. So generally speaking, it's a good idea to log access, HTTP access, HTTP errors, PHP errors, FTP access, SSH access, and if you can, cPanel access as well. Logging is really good just because, most of the time for a shared hosting environment, you won't necessarily have anyone monitoring the logs, but it does help with recovery a lot. If you can find out the vector, the infection vector, intrusion vector, to prevent that from being exploited again. If you are running a larger scale operation, then, it might be a good idea to actually have something monitoring the logs to make sure that you catch things early.
And another thing to add there, and I believe we talked about this recently, one of the past few weeks, is you may want to go in and check and see what your logging is doing right now. I'm not sure, with your experience, Ram, do you have to go in, do you have to enable a lot of that? Like sometimes access logs are only maybe logging, a day, and that can potentially be changed.
Yeah, one of the things about logs is that they do take a lot of space. Or they can take a lot of space, at least, depending on how busy your site is. Though, granted, if your site is busy enough to generate a large number of logs, you may want to consider having some sort of solution set up specifically for handling logging. But, again, a lot of sites hosted on shared hosting aren't going to have that problem. Most shared hosting providers do basically make you turn on logs every set number of days or hours and then stop logging. But it's useful to find, a hosting provider where access logs are on automatically, and then they'll archive them for the last week or the last 30 days. Like, at least a week of logging is nice because hopefully if you're paying attention to your site, you should notice something weird happening within a week or so.
I see Christian had mentioned you never need logs until you really do need logs. And so if you have the ability to go in and check and see what's currently logging and set that up, that's a good idea. Now, we did have a question. How often do we rotate logs, or how often would we recommend to rotate logs?
I don't think I can reasonably answer how often we rotate logs, but I think 30 days is a generally accepted decent time to rotate logs. 7 days at the very shortest would probably be good. So yeah.
Now, this is something, Chloe, you probably run into, or you were running into a lot with cleaning sites. The logs probably just absolutely vital, maybe one of the most important things, right, to figuring out exactly what happened and where an attack came from.
Yeah, logs are incredibly important for figuring out the intrusion vector. It's how most of the time when I was on the site cleaning team, I would figure out what exactly happened. There's some other artifacts here and there that are left around that can help you pinpoint what happened, but the logs are incredibly important. And I actually have a sample to share with you. Should I do that right now?
Yeah, let's do that.
Yeah.
I want to see
Okay.
this.
All right, application window, sharing my screen. Can you see that? Okay, perfect.
Oh yeah.
All right, so I have a copy of one of my log files for my test site that got compromised. So one of the things you might want to check for is WP login. That's one of the things that I would look for when I was looking for infections, and seeing if I could find a WP login 302, because that means that a login was successful and you were redirected to the WP admin area. So here I already have one very easily. So I have a WP login 302. So I was able to log in. And then now I want to look around this area just to see if I can get an idea of maybe how they logged in. And just at a quick glance, we can see that we have 2 posts to XML RPC. and we can see that one of them is a 401 and the second one is a 745, and that's the length of the response. So obviously there was a little bit of a different response from the first attempt to the second attempt. And so this first attempt is basically an unsuccessful authentication attempt to post something to XML RPC. And the second one verifies that the credentials are correct and sends a legitimate XML RPC response. So basically, with this post, they were able to determine my password, which I think at the time was like root or something, super easy because I just wanted someone to get in there. And so that's how they got in. And then they went to the login page and they accessed it with the 200 because that's a successful response. And then they logged in, and then we can scroll down a little bit more. And then we see a get h.php 200. So that means they've uploaded a web shell basically. And then if you keep going, you can keep seeing, so like h.php file source, and then they're going through and finding paths and stuff. So this is why logs are incredibly important, because they can tell you exactly how someone got in. And so now, based on these logs, I would know that I need to change my password to something a lot stronger.
Have you ever ran into a case, maybe during a cleaning, where you were able to discover that an attacker was able to maybe delete any traces of them in the logs, or that you've seen some evidence of that?
I don't remember specifically if I've seen that, but it is very common for attackers to delete entries in the logs, chunks of times in the log, things like that. So it's it's important, but it's not required because it could be a little bit more difficult. That if you can keep your logs hosted off the same server as your site, that is optimal, just so those logs can't be tampered with. It would make it a lot harder for them to get access to those and delete them. So if you can, keep them in a separate area. If you can't, then that's okay.
Yeah. One of our viewers also brought up that logs do, since IP addresses do count as personally identifiable identification or personally identifiable information, GDPR does have some limitations on log rotation. I can't, honestly, I don't know what those are off the top of my head. So we should maybe come back and cover that in another episode. Maybe we should do a GDPR episode.
Yeah.
There you go. That's an idea.
Compliance.
But compliance is a thing to keep in mind of it as well, depending on where you are and who your visitors and customers are. So just another thing to be aware of.
Yeah, lots of good things there with logging. So if you have a project going right now, that gives you some things to look at with regard to what's currently being logged and what your options are. And ideally, if you're keeping logs for longer than a day, that way, whenever you find out something went wrong, you have access to those. And as Chloe had mentioned, it might be a good idea to have those backed up off the server or in a different location. So that covers logging. What do we have next here?
One of the things that we do want to have people make sure of is that their hosting provider allows up-to-date server software. So that means, offering the latest, or at the very least, a non-completely deprecated PHP version. I mean, there are still hosting providers out there where you can't upgrade to more than 5.6. For just a few of their servers. I mean, as they bring more servers into the rotation, they'll allow, later PHP versions, but they'll still, there's still customer accounts on servers where they won't support more than PHP 5.6, and that's kind of a problem. Up-to-date versions of MySQL, because, not only do regular bugs get fixed, but security bugs as well, or MariaDB if that's what you're using, which I do like, but, they mostly work interchangeably.
So you had mentioned PHP. What exactly does a WordPress installation need to run on your site? So these are some things that you could check with your hosting provider and see what versions are available and where you're at there.
WordPress needs PHP and MySQL or MariaDB. Apart from that, does need some sort of server software, Apache, Nginx, IIS, which is another thing you want to make sure that, you're using that your hosting provider has at least a semi-recent version of whatever server software they're offering, since bugs in those are less common but very severe when they're found. yeah.
We recently saw the update to WordPress that allows automatic updates for plugins and themes and so on, and that's another thing to take into account with these essentials to running your WordPress site, or that these things need to be updated regularly as well for similar reasons. Is there a good time here, like because these probably aren't being updated automatically in most cases, Ram, or may they be?
So here's the thing: when it comes to like PHP versions, most of the time your hosting provider will let you choose from some recent-ish versions. So that's a good place to make sure that at the very least your PHP version is up to date. They almost never give you control over things like server software version or MySQL version. And as a general rule, hosting providers do tend to prefer long-term support versions of that software, just because they want to make sure that it's stable since it's running at scale. But you'll want to make sure that they're at least using the latest long-term support version of whatever they're using for their server software. OS software actually matters as well. If they're running Ubuntu like 12 or something, that could be a red flag. And so here's the thing: you can actually find out a lot about your hosting configuration using WordFence diagnostics.
I'll go ahead and share my screen to show the diagnostics real quick.
I was going to ask that, Chloe, whenever you were doing site cleanings, were you pretty much going down that list whenever you would get into a site to initially look and see what went wrong? Or are you pretty much quickly looking at PHP version, MySQL, and so on and so forth to see anything that's severely out of date there?
Yeah, that's something we would look at a little bit to see if maybe it was I don't think we see it super often, but see if it was maybe something that your WordPress, it's not WordPress itself that caused your site to get compromised, but maybe a vulnerability in your server version or software. I don't think it was super common, but it's definitely something that we would take a look at. So let me go ahead and share this real quick. Can you see that all right? Let me go ahead and widen it.
There we go. That looks even better.
Awesome. So what we have here is the diagnostics. You can find it under Tools, Diagnostics, and then you can just scroll down. You can see that your WordFence version. You can expand them all at the same time or not, and go down one by one. But then it goes through and you can see all sorts of different things here, like your WordFence firewall configurations, if you have the correct SQL permissions for WordFence to run. What your PHP environment is, the version. You might want to search the version real quick and see if maybe there's any vulnerabilities in that PHP version. And then it just has everything here about your configuration and versions and things. I have an issue here that I should probably fix. And then you just keep going and it gives you all that good details for you. And if you just take a look at those version numbers and things and see if maybe there's a vulnerability in this database version, maybe get in touch with your host and see what they can do to help you upgrade to a version that doesn't have that vulnerability there.
Now, I'm not sure if you showed it there. I see it down a little below the process owner. That's something to look at as well for permissions.
Yes.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so you want to make sure that this isn't something like root, and you want to make sure it's something unique for your site. So I think in a lot of cases, it's going to be like the first couple characters of your site username for your cPanel or something, because that's how I believe they break out their permissions. But basically, this process owner is www-data. So basically, I have a certain set of privileges that I can execute as www-data, and I don't have full root permissions. One of the things attackers will try to do is actually escalate their privileges if they get backend access through SSH or something, grab a reverse shell, which is making a connection between the server and them, and then try and escalate those privileges to maybe root on the server and do all sorts of different bad damage there. And that's why those PHP version, server versions and things like that are important, because that's where you see a lot of the really bad privilege escalation. So basically, we're good because it runs as www-data and not root. So if someone was able to gain that access, they couldn't do too much damage unless one of my other versions is vulnerable to something. Does that make sense?
I mean, it makes sense to me.
Okay.
A lot of good information there in the diagnostics. If anybody's running into any issues, scan issues or permissions potentially, that's an easy place to look and go through. And usually anything will stand out that is bad with the bright red text there. Um, Now, I saw George in chat mentioned, Chloe, that he's inspired to do security training as a classic software developer graduate who switched to web stuff. So, where would you recommend starting there? I remember we had talked about this recently.
Yeah. Okay. That's awesome, by the way.
Yeah.
So makes me wonder. I think the best place would be Security Plus to start getting into security. I know Ram's got a couple certifications as well.
Actually, that you inspired me to do certifications.
Oh.
I started out with just one, and I ended up getting more because, well,
Oh. Yeah. Oh. Well, I think Security Plus is a good place to start. And SSCP is also a really good place to start as well. I think Security Plus is a little bit more recognized. So that would be a good place to start and get some foundational security knowledge, like what's the CIA triad, what are some different encryption types, and then there's a whole long way to go from there with different certifications and stuff. You can get like stuck down a rabbit hole of getting all sorts of different certifications.
Is
But
that where you are right now? In the rabbit hole of
yeah,
many, many certifications.
yeah, I am. They're so much fun, and you learn so much from each one. So, yeah, I really enjoy those. But Security Plus, I think, is a great place to start. And if you don't have, well, see, you could also start with the A Plus or the Network Plus. But if you already have some foundational knowledge, then I would just skip over to Security Plus. That's what I did.
Get right into it.
Yeah, get into the good stuff.
So that covered the updating your server software and server software in general. Anything to add there, Ram, Chloe, before we move on here?
I think we've probably covered as much as we reasonably can for that in a
Yeah.
1 hour session. So
Now we're on to another important one that we bring up pretty regularly here, and that is backups. So what are some things to look at with backups here?
well, number one, backups are actually one of the best ways to recover from a security incident, as long as you have backups going back far enough that you're not restoring an infected version of your site, which is a fairly frequent problem. So, effectively, if your site gets hacked and you have a recent backup from before the hack, you can restore that backup if you know it's clean and then update everything so that you don't get hacked again. That, by the way, making sure to update everything after you do the restore is also very important so that you don't get hacked again. But there's full backups, there's incremental backups, there's differential backups, but a lot of hosting providers just handle it for you. They'll do like, weekly, full backups and, daily incremental or differential backups. And, they'll retain them for at least a month. That's probably a good way to do it. And if you can find a hosting provider that just, does backups for you at least a month back for you free or for a reasonable fee, that's really awesome, especially if they don't keep the backups on the same hosting account as the main site, because it is possible to corrupt backups too, or delete them if you're an attacker and you get into a hosting site and you're like, oh, hey, there's the backups folder. I'll just delete those. So, yeah.
And thankfully, if your hosting provider, is not currently doing that, there are some free solutions out there to do. Now, you mentioned, about a month would be good as far as keeping backups.
So one of the more sane ways I've seen things done is basically have daily incremental backups and then have have those roll into weekly backups and then have the weekly backups roll into monthly backups and then keep like a year's worth of monthly backups, but only keep like the last month's worth of weekly backups and only keep the last week's worth of daily backups.
I would have to see a replay of what you just said there for me to not be confused by the number of times we used backups there. We did cover backups quite a bit recently. Chloe, anything else to add on those? Because we do have some more content. I see time is flying here.
Yeah.
It
When
always
you're
does.
talking about hosting security, we could do about a 5-hour show probably.
Yeah.
Uh,
I think that's good. So just look to see if your host will offer backups, and if they don't, it's not terrible, but it would be a great preferred method so that you can kind of manage everything in one place. And yeah, I think we covered that pretty good.
Yeah, if your host doesn't offer backups, there are also, plugins or other solutions that can let you do, handle your own backups. But, handling your own backups always comes with risks as well. So,
Yeah.
Now, that was the fifth thing. So, number 5, backups. Now, number 6, network level firewalls. What do we have for this?
Well, I think Ram's going to tell us a little bit about the OSI model, right?
yes, please do not throw sausage pizza away. So, the OSI model is basically a 7-layer model, much like a delicious 7-layer dip. It's a model of how network communication happens. From the physical layer, the data link layer, the network layer, transport layer, session layer, presentation layer, and application layer. So web application firewalls typically work on the present, as the name implies, application layer, and to some extent the presentation layer as well. And they're very useful to protect against specific attacks against web applications, which, like WordPress, particular types of vulnerabilities and plugins. A network layer firewall isn't going to do much against those. What it is useful for is in case of some things like distributed denial of service attacks, where you have, a botnet of hundreds of thousands of IPs attacking one site in order to take it down. Now, a web application firewall can help minimize the strain of that kind of thing if you have IPs on a block list like we have. But if at a large enough scale, it is useful if your hosting provider does do some filtering of IPs and stops attackers if they're actually trying to take down your site. That's something that you need more hardware to deal with.
Yeah, and then the network firewall is also going to filter so there might be an intranet, which is like internal servers and things, and then an extranet, and certain internal network components. So it'll filter traffic like, can this IP go through, or is it going to be blocked? So it's important to have that network one within the infrastructure, basically. That'll block network traffic from going in and out. So if an attacker perhaps gains access to a hosting account that's not yours and somehow manages to infiltrate deeply, very deeply, and then tries to pivot throughout the network, if there's a firewall throughout that network, then hopefully it's going to block that network or that attacker from traversing through the network and maybe accessing another server that has your site.
Yeah, I mean, a web application firewall is only going to listen on the ports that the web application is listening on for the most part. So if there's, other ports, let's say there's, an attacker's trying to brute force SSH. That's where, a network firewall might be listening for that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Now, what do we typically see for a network firewall? Did you mention mod security? Is that what we most commonly see?
Mod security is an Apache module, and it does offer some basic protection as well as some, web application level protection. But it's generally generic. Typically, your actual hosting providers will use some sort of hardware, IDS or IPS, in order to actually deal with things like that. They're going to have actual appliances sitting in front of the servers in case they get flooded. So.
One thing you might want to look at is the hosting provider's security policy, if you can get a hold of it. And you can take a look at some of the different things that they do to manage security. That might be one thing to check out if you're very, very, very serious about your WordPress site security.
Yeah.
All right, so I think that covers network level firewalls. Anything else there to add before we move on?
I mean, IP tables kind of counts as a network level firewall, right? IP tables is good if you're running your own VPS or have root access on your site. You're setting up some good IP table rules can take a lot of the load off of your web application firewall, just because sometimes the same IPs will be doing unpleasant things in multiple ways. But again, it's layered security. Don't do just one. Why not both?
Okay, so back to our swag question here. Number 7, or seventh thing that you're wanting from your hosting provider would be DDoS prevention. Now, can you go over our swag questions? So let me check here. The question was, what does DDoS stand for, and why would an attacker do this?
Well, Chloe, you want to answer this?
Oh, sure. So DDoS stands for Distributed Denial of Service. So it's an attack that's going to deny service. So an attacker would do this to deny availability to a site. So it's the CIA triad. It's trying to deny service to availability, which is the A in the triad. And then so some legitimate reasons why they might do this is to deny access to a site, maybe a competitor site. We saw this with PipDig, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was a premium plugin provider actually added a backdoor to their plugin and also added a feature that made all of their users DDoS their competitors.
Yeah.
Which is awesome. Not awesome at all, actually.
Yeah. And they might also do it to maybe take the site offline to do other things in the background so they don't get noticed, because maybe they take the logging server offline so that they can go and do other things on the other site. And so basically it's kind of like a way to get competitive advantage, or basically do things in the background, and kind of go undetected a little bit.
You can distract the incident response team with the DDoS while you're, pivoting inside the network since you're already in.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, how common are these attacks to see?
I'm pretty sure that every major organization gets DDoSed pretty frequently. Like, I don't have inside access, but I'm pretty sure that most major organizations get DDoSed at some scale pretty frequently. It's just a question of, is this enough to actually be considered an incident, or is this just a background level of DDoS?
Now, are there any cloud-based services that we recommend for this, or do we want to talk about those a little bit?
Cloudflare, CloudFront lets you set up rules for that as well. A lot of the CDN providers do offer some degree of DDoS mitigation just because they're, they have a bunch of, edge servers, so kind of spreads it out anyways. Yes, Cloudflare is quite good. If you're looking for a hosting provider, make sure that they have at least something in place to deal with DDoS attacks. Most large hosting providers do. That is one of the advantages of using the larger hosting providers. But even if you're using, a small hosting provider, your own VPS, then you still have options like Cloudflare. So,
so you obviously want to check with your host to see, but what happens during a DDoS mitigation exactly from these services?
They basically just figure out which attacks are likely to be intended to deny service, which attacks are basically just spammy requests, and just drop the packets. Okay. And basically try to let through legitimate requests using any number of criteria of what looks like a legitimate request. So. And occasionally legitimate requests get dropped as well, but for the most part, they've gotten fairly good at filtering out the bad ones from the good ones. So, yeah. There is one other thing I kind of wanted to go through, which we brought up at the beginning, which wasn't really covered by any of those things, but it's database access. Does your host require you to log in to, a hosting panel before you have access to whatever database manager you have, or can the database manager be accessed directly? Or does your hosting providers, do their databases allow direct external access without a database panel, just via, MySQL command line? Because if so, then if your database credentials get breached, then someone can do whatever they want in your database. Whereas if that database only allows access from your hosting server, that's a good deal more secure. So
Now, I think we have, speaking of what we had covered, I think we have a graphic summing up the 7 points, there we go, that we talked about today. Anything else on those, Ram or Chloe?
just
We unpacked a lot of good information here, so.
Just trying. Oh, one thing. You could check to see if your hosting provider allows you to disable PHP functions. I think most of them will. I'm not 100% sure, but see if you can disable certain PHP functions that your plugins and WordPress isn't using. So, like maybe shell exec, for example, so that if an attacker is able to get a backdoor on your site, they can't execute those shelly kind of commands. And so, basically, disabling those functions makes it a little bit harder for them to maybe establish a reverse shell or gain file access to your site.
Yeah, though it is nice if they give you the option of disabling functions without just deciding, here's a list of functions we've decided to disable, which can make your site more secure, but also can cause problems depending on what you need to run.
Yeah.
Okay, so back to our swag winners, another graphic we may have here. So we got 5 of them: Rob LaChance, Jan Christensen, Eric Bledsoe, Brandon Godding, and Miha Nasadine, maybe? Ram, what do you think about that one?
Mihai Nasadin?
Is that close
That
there?
sounds about right.
I like that. Yeah, so congratulations to you 5. You submitted the correct answer with what is the DDoS there. And we always say, once you get your swag, if you want to send a picture in, we'll put it up on the air here.
I do have one additional thing to add. If you're using a CDN as a DDoS mitigation service, you do need to set your hosting account to disallow any access from anywhere other than through the CDN. Like if someone has, your origin IP, they can bypass the CDN by editing their host file, unless you specifically set it to disallow any access that's not through the CDN.
Brandon said that I had said his name right, which is a rarity for me, so it may have been a fluke. But yeah, congratulations there for all of you that had won that. Now, before we clock out here, we do have one of the first things I always recommend is subscribing to our mailing list. And there's another good reason to do that, because we got some news coming out relating to WordFence Central. Is that right, Ram, Chloe? We can't go too far into that. But,
I'm just saying that we're adding some features, or we're adding a big feature that a lot of our users have wanted for a while, and I think you're going to like it a lot.
Yeah, you're going to want to stay tuned, and the perfect place to do that is the mailing list. Whether you're a free or premium user, getting the mail and the news as quickly as you do might be the first that you hear about something that Chloe or Ram or somebody else in the Threat Intel team had found. Give you a chance to get back onto your site, get something updated, switch out a plugin that might be vulnerable. So the mailing list is very useful there. If you're not using Central already, and we got some news coming out for that here soon, check out Central. It's a free to use hub on wordfence.com. It's wordfence.com/central. It's a great place to organize all of your sites that are protected with WordFence, whether it's free or premium. You can put templates on the sites. If you find a good scanning schedule or a way to scan your sites, you can use that same template, put it on all of your sites, whether you have 2 of them, 10 of them, or 100 of them. We have some customers with a bunch on there, and it's you can set up your email alert preferences in there if you just want to get one email that goes over everything that we found. Very helpful. As I mentioned, the mailing list, you can find the mailing list in the footer of the wordfence.com homepage, as well as the podcast. Now, Ram, you recently just started doing the podcast. How's that going?
I got some big shoes to fill, Scott. I really do. So
You're too kind.
But I'm enjoying it. We get to talk about some interesting news every week, find out what big security events have happened in the past week and what big WordPress events have happened in the past week. And, just generally have a good time chatting with Kathy about WordPress and security and stuff. So, yeah.
I was going to say, you're joined by Kathy, who is also very awesome, and you two sounded amazing on there in the last episode. So if you have not already, check that out. How long is that, Ram? Is it 10 to 20 minutes, give or take?
We've been keeping it, relatively bite-sized, 15 to 20 minutes per session so far. Latest events and some analysis.
Yeah, it's very fun to listen to. So you can check it out on Spotify as well if you have that. Now, before we get out of here, we definitely want to say thanks to our premium customers and subscribers. Without you, we wouldn't be able to do these weekly streams and get on here and answer some questions and cover some cool security topics. And, we miss meeting up at the WordCamps, and in the meantime, this has been amazing, and we appreciate all of our premium subscribers for making this possible and making what Ram and Chloe do in Threat Intel, finding the issues that they do, and being able to get out the firewall rules to our premium customers as quickly as they do. It's a ton of protection there, and that's just one of the benefits that our premium subscribers are getting. We also appreciate, our free users and all of our other viewers who are tuning in week in and week out. It's very fun. Also, with the premium subscription, you're getting the real-time IP blacklist. My favorite feature, I always bring it up here. Check your live traffic if you're currently a premium user to get an idea of the number of IPs that you're seeing. That feature block. It's very interesting and awesome to see sometimes. That list, if you're not a premium subscriber now, you get access to that immediately when you put your license in. There's nothing that you need to configure, nothing that you need to set up. It's maintained on our side. When we see an IP brute forcing, it may be trying thousands of brute force attempts in a very short amount of time. We throw that IP onto the blacklist. It is no longer then able to interact with premium sites, and it makes it a bunch easier for your firewall to just get rid of that. Open.film, another thing I like to talk about. If you get a chance, head over to www.open.film and check that out. We just had somebody say that they miss WordCamps as well. If you've never been to a WordCamp, you can check out open.film and get a good idea of who you're going to run into at a WordCamp, what the community's like, what everybody's working on. And it's a nice little short film that we produced here. Mark and Sean, Sean's our producer. He's throwing the graphics up on the screen for everybody. Did I miss anything, Ram, Chloe? I think we went over everything. We talked about the swag. We, keep an eye out for our changes coming to Central. You're going to want to get on the mailing list for that. But other than that, I think we're good, right?
I just hope that everyone has a very spooky week.
Yeah. And I think you have to set your clocks back this weekend or forward. Or back. I think it's back. Fall back, right?
Something's changing.
I'm in
this week,
Arizona.
yeah.
I don't have to deal with that noise. I just have to deal with everyone else dealing with it. So I actually have to deal with it backwards. Because y'all are falling back, so I have to pretend I'm springing forward, relatively speaking, because time is relative.
Well, that's another thing to look forward to. We got Halloween coming up. Hopefully everybody has a really safe and fun Halloween and a good rest of the week. We will be back here soon. You can always look for us. Hit the like button under the video here. Hit subscribe and the bell. You'll be notified anytime we put new content here on YouTube. We appreciate everybody stopping by, hanging out, and asking some questions. We will see you soon, and thanks again. Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Everyone.
Thank you.